Listening to Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups from the Oval Office of the Gulf Coast.
Welcome back to Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, 1330 WEBY. Carl speaks with ontological certitude and theological indubitableness. For you liberals out there, this means that Carl knows who he is and that he is unashamed to be on a first-name basis with God. Now, here's Carl Gallups.
All right, welcome back, Gulf Coast. Welcome back, America, from sea to shining sea. Welcome back, world. And welcome back, Israel. We were just on the phone with Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat. It's about midnight and a half in Israel right now. On our shores, it's 5:34 Eastern Time, 4:34 Central Time. We broadcast out of Central Time, but we have people way over on the West Coast listening to us as well. So we've got Mountain Time and Pacific Time. We've got people in Alaska and Hawaii that listen to us, people around the world, in other places of the world that are listening live right now. And we thank you, all of you. And then again, let me give a shout out to our Sunday night audience that will be listening to this show, this very same show, right now on 1620 AM and 92.3 FM on the Gulf Coast, two blowtorch powerhouse stations, all connected to the ADX Communication Broadcast Group. All right, Michael Shoesmith, it's so good to have you with us, man. Michael Shoesmith in the house, the director, the executive editor of the PNN News and Ministry Network. Mike, thanks for being on the show today. It seems like the evolutionists are schizophrenic and have a multiple personality disorder. We're constantly having to report. It's like they say, okay, here's what we believe. And then 3 weeks later, whoops, we've changed our mind. We're changing everything. All right. Yeah, this changes everything. All right. And so now here's what we believe. Here's how it happened. Now, remember, this is settled truth, Mike. They've been telling us this forever. You and I have been in ministry since 2008 on the internet. And our first people that battled us the most were evolutionists and atheists. Right. And they kept telling us, don't you stupid people know that evolution is settled science? It's settled science. Let's move on, you moron Christians. But the more they discover, the more they're finding out that the evidence matches much closer to what the Word of God says than anywhere near what their fairy tale says. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but they've changed it again, Mike. Report on it.
Again,
Tell us about it, and then let's talk about it.
Well, the higher they climb on the mountain of actual knowledge, Carl, the closer they get to the peak where they'll just find a preacher with a Bible saying, what took you so long?
Yeah, what took you so long to get here? That's good. That's good.
But, this is from the news. Did you happen to watch, now we live streamed the Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate from a few years ago. We live streamed that. We had tens of thousands of people watching it on our network. Our network properties and so on. It was a great debate. I watched it live, and it was really good. Ken Ham really represented the community very well, and in my opinion, owned that entire debate. But you know, when you look at the internet forums, which are still discussing that whole thing, by the way, they'll say that Bill Nye was the victor in that. But Ken Ham is now doing a victory lap, Carl. I think that because the main point in that debate made by Ken Ham was that there are two different sort of pools of science. There's modern, visible, observable science, and there's historical, unobservable science, where we have to take the best of the evidence that we can find and draw conclusions simply from that evidence, because there was no one there to document anything. There was no eyewitnesses to the account of creation that are alive today. Now, we do have, as Ken said throughout the debate, that, well, because Nye said several times that, well, there's nothing written down from the beginning of time when the chemical processes happened and everything. There was no eyewitnesses there. And Ken was quick to say, well, wait a minute. We do have a book that describes what happened when everything was, and of course, Nye was quick to dismiss that. But so this is an article from the New Scientist, came out this week. Okay, are you ready to unleash your inner nerd here, Carl? Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready. Unleash my inner nerd. I can't wait. I love this stuff. I love this stuff. I'm a science geek and nerd. Yes, go ahead.
Well, we'll try to have fun with this a little bit because we can't take this stuff too seriously. Because, like, in 5 or 6 years, this is all going to change again.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
so we can't take this stuff too seriously.
Especially after they hear the audio of this show today. They'll change it again in a few weeks. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, much like the Piltdown Man fraud, this will probably end up in textbooks as the absolute truth. Much like for example, it's long been thought that, this is from the newscientist.com, it's long been thought that the ingredients for life came together slowly, bit by bit. But now there is evidence that it all happened at once, Carl, in a chemical Big Bang. So here we have, so for the longest time, it has been taught in science textbooks, in schools, in everywhere, on National Geographic and Discovery.com, all these places have been teaching that, right? That the ingredients for life came together slowly, bit by bit. All the documentaries on nature and everything else have been teaching that. All of the cartoons that have been produced by these people have been teaching that life came together slowly, bit by bit, right?
Yep.
So that was the settled science. That was, science comes from the word science comes from the Latin word scientia, which literally means knowledge.
Right. This
has been the quote unquote knowledge for the last several decades that life came together, the ingredients for life, rather, came together slowly, bit by bit.
Right.
See, now that is no longer the consensus now. They have completely changed everything, Carl.
Yeah,
so
I know. Evolution has been put on its ear.
Right. So that's exactly what Ken Ham was saying. He was saying, okay, we have the observable science, that we all have the evidence. Nobody's debating the observable science. If we see science happening in front of us, the evolutionists, the creationists, they all go, wow, look at that. That's really cool, right? That's science that we can observe and test and falsify and everything else. But the historical science, what Ken Ham was saying, is that, okay, so we all have evidence for something. We all have the exact same evidence. It's the interpretation that matters.
Right.
Because the evolutionists, evolution being the creation myth for the religion of atheism, they take that and they look at all of the evidence through the grid of their religion of atheism. They all look at that through the grid of that.
Correct.
We look at the evidence through the grid of Scripture.
Right.
We say, okay, our presupposition is that God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and so on, and that's what we see happening. And we look at the evidence, we go, wow, there's a tremendous amount of evidence for that, and the evidence for the flood, and the evidence for the existence of all these biblical kings and so on. They kick over a rock in the Middle East, and they find evidence for the biblical narrative, right?
Right.
So Ham was simply saying, look, there's this historical science which we all have the evidence for, but it's all subject to our own personal interpretations, right? That's all he was saying. And Bill Nye's head was about to explode if you watch the debate again. He was so frustrated by this. He said, no. The science is the science. If you go back billions of years, he would say, the science is still the science, it's still the knowledge. But so now Ken Ham's victory lap here. So I went to answersingenesis.org.
Yeah.
And this is written by Ken Ham just the other day, actually, on August the 20th. This is his victory lap. He says, for decades, scientists have debated when, how, and where the first life supposedly evolved. Various hypotheses abound. Maybe RNA came first. Perhaps life evolved around hydrothermal vents. Maybe life arrived on an asteroid. But none have satisfied everyone due to significant problems with each one. And now an old idea has been revived and refined. Maybe there was a, quote, chemical Big Bang, unquote, and life arose spontaneously in a river with all the... This whole article is just dripping with sarcasm. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. With all the major components in one place all at once. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what they're talking about is spontaneous eruption of life, which goes back to the oldest superstitions of man. I mean, the people that were breaking from the Word of God hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, they would observe, for example, a pile of cow manure, and then they would come back a few days later and they would see maggots in it.
Right.
And then they would say, oh my gosh, the cow manure gave life to these little worms. Instantaneous, the spontaneous combustion, eruption of life. And so I mean, that was their theory of life. And, of course, they were mocked and laughed at and trashed and lampooned eventually.
Right.
And even evolution tried to get around that corner. But now they've circled all the way back saying it all erupted spontaneously. I mean, humanity was here as a whole spontaneously. It didn't happen in a little... Mike, I'm going to let you do some more talking here, but I got to say this. I am convinced that one of the arguments we've been making, I'm not saying they did it because of us, but I'm saying, and many other creationists have been making this argument, but you and I, we hammered this on PNN. We've got video after video after video and article after article challenging the evolutionist. So if it all happened slowly over time, explain this one thing to us. Explain the human recreative system.
Right.
And why the male system is completely different from the female system, the organs, the internal organs, the external organs, and why that is and how it happened little bit by little bit by little bit, because if that's how it was happening, where did humans come from before the reproductive systems happened? And when did the first male and first female even meet, and how did they know that they had to go through this process to develop another human? And where did their reproductive organs come from? And why, if evolution is the survival of the fittest and happens over millions of years, why over millions of years instead of just simple cell division to recreate yourself? Why did evolution come up with something as complex and tedious and as delicate as the human reproductive system? And when you answer that, then answer about the other 25 million species of life and their reproductive systems. Where did that come from? And how in the world did evolution do it, and why?
Right.
And they don't have an answer. They don't have an answer. They never have. That's why they've come up with this, and they said, oh, it just all erupted spontaneously. Go ahead.
No, they're clearly wielding Occam's razor by the blade here, Carl.
Yeah.
I mean, even during Aristotle's time, Aristotle taught abiogenesis, the whole thing with the heat and the dying carcass producing life, and he taught that as settled science. Yep. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about what they are trying to shoehorn into the minds of humanity today with respect to where we came from.
Good. I can't wait. Folks, again, this is why you listen. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups. Mike Shoesmith, my guest. We're going to unpack more and more of this when we come back. So if you'll give us 2 minutes, we're going to take a quick 2-minute timeout, and then Mike and I will come back, and we're going to keep unpacking this for you. This will give you some ammunition to get out there and talk to folks about. All right? We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups in the Oval Office of the Gulf Coast.
Welcome back to Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups. Sit down, buckle up, and hang on.
Yeah, all right, folks, welcome back. Mike Shoesmith. So Mike, listen, you and I were just talking offline, and so let's just keep going with what we were saying because I want our folks to hear this. So what I was saying and what you and I were talking about is like Ken Ham was saying that, listen, they're really... there are two ways of doing science. One of them is what we learned in the third grade called scientific method. I mean, almost all real scientists use a system of scientific method that involves the elements of being able to observe something. Well, first you have a theory and a hypothesis, and then you make your observations, and then you see if you can repeat it, you see if you can demonstrate your theory, and then you have to be able to repeat it. It can't be just a one-time thing that happens and say, well, that proves the whole universe right there. We made it happen once, so that's it always happens that way. No, there can always be anomalies, so you have to be able to repeat. Observable, demonstrated, repeatable, and falsifiable. That is, it also has to have a way out if it's wrong. There has to be a way that you can falsify it if it's not true. So if it's not falsifiable, if it's not repeatable, if it's not able to be demonstrated, then, and if you can't observe it, then it's not considered scientific method, so it therefore cannot be called settled science. You can still have the theory, you can still hope and wish and be looking for evidence, but how dare you say something is settled science that no one's ever observed, no one's ever been able to demonstrate it, no one's ever been able to repeat it, therefore it can't be falsified. And now they've taken it to another level, and they've come full circle around and said, well, it must have all happened at once. That's true, but that's scientifically impossible as well. But it is not impossible spiritually, from another dimension, from the throne of God, to breathe into the dust of the earth, and boom, it happens. God speaks, and it happens. There's really no other explanation. Evolution just doesn't explain it because of human reproductive system alone, not counting the dozens of other systems in the human body by itself. And that doesn't even include the 25 million other species of life. I mean, a tornado going through a junkyard does not create a jet airliner. It does not.
It does not. No, it sure doesn't. You know, when we developed the technology to find out what was on top of Mount Olympus, we were able to rule out the Greek theory of the gods living up there. And when we were able to finally, circumvent the globe through, satellite technology and space, space flight and so on, we were able to rule out, the Hindu version of the Earth sitting on a giant turtle, and, or the Greek version of the Earth sitting on top of Atlas's shoulder.
Yeah, don't even get me started on flat Earth. Go ahead. I mean, all of the science rules out flat Earth, including just simple everyday airline aviation techniques. But go ahead.
Exactly. So, but scientifically speaking, they have not been able to, nor will they ever be able to rule out the God did it theory, which is the one that you and I hold to. God did it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And I mean, if you're going to hold on to the theory of deep time evolution that microbes turned into microbiologists and fish turned into human beings, you are wielding Occam's razor by the blade. You really are, because Occam's razor says do away with all the superfluous stuff, and what you have left, that's probably the truth, right?
Yeah.
So going back to, I'm so happy when I first got to know you and what you were all about and your education and so on, because my scientific credentials are basically that I've seen every episode of Star Trek.
That's really good. So you're a scientist.
I'm a scientist. But like I read the actual scientific journals at PLOS ONE and all that. I get right into the meat of it myself. So like I don't have the credentials, but I do have the head for it, and I wrap my brain around all this stuff pretty well. But going back to Ken Ham's victory lap here, he says now step back to this is exactly what they are admitting and what they want us to now believe. This is what they are admitting and what they now want us to believe there over at the New Scientist, because the New Scientist article explains that life requires at the bare minimum 3 core systems, okay? An outer membrane, the ability to metabolize, and the ability to produce using genes. Chemical evolutionists have a problem when it comes to trying to explain the origin of life. You need all 3 of these systems at the same time for life to even be imaginable, because you need that membrane, right, to contain everything. If you don't have the membrane, you don't have a way for life to be produced inside of a unit, right, a cohesive place for life to happen.
Right.
And without that membrane, life can't happen. It just can't happen. So they're looking at all this now and saying, okay, we have to have all 3 of these things, the ability to metabolize and the ability to reproduce using genes. All 3 of these things have to be contained and happen all at they have to be there in existence at the same time. Yeah. So how did this happen bit by bit? They're now admitting, Carl, that that's impossible.
I know.
For that to happen bit by bit. They're now saying that we have to just throw everything out in the garbage and start over and find out how this happened.
Which is what we've been screaming for years, and they called us idiots. Now they've come around to our side.
well, now they're saying, see, Ken Ham says basically the same thing. He says, in other words, it used to be, I don't know if I get through this sentence. In other words, it used to be that life evolved so slowly that you couldn't see it happening. Yeah. And now they're saying it happened so fast that we missed it.
Yeah. That's great. Well, listen, and to what you were just saying, think again about the human body. So the reproductive system is really the only system that you can completely remove and the human organism still lives. But if you take out the nervous system, it dies. If you take out the circulatory system, the human dies. If you take out the digestive system, the human dies. If you take out the elimination system, and of course we've got technology to kind of get around that now, but without technology, which is intelligence, if you take out the elimination system, the human dies. If you take out the lymphatic system, the human dies. If you take, I can go on and on. All of these dozens of systems that make up a human, remove any one of them and the human dies. The reproductive system is like an add-on, but without it, humanity dies. So who thought of that? Evolution couldn't have come up with that, and those systems couldn't have each developed, the nervous system develops. So there's a blob of nerves on the ground. Millions of years later, it develops a spine, and a lot of people still haven't developed a spine. But you've got that. Okay, and then the skeletal system. And then a million years later, it develops a circulatory system. But by now, the brain's dead because there's no circulation. So, you can't do it. Won't work. It's got to all appear at once. And that's what the Bible says. That's what we've said. That's what scientific method says. The evolutionists said we were all a bunch of science deniers. And now they've come full circle and said, you know what? It had to have appeared all at once.
Right. Exactly. Sure. And geneticist, and I'll conclude with this, geneticist Dr. Georgia Purdom, she sort of summarizes that entire study with this. She says, of course, all this depends on the everything first idea proving correct. Stacks, protocells, and the new biochemical insights have won over many researchers. So a lot of this stuff, Carl, they're all starting to, like a magnet, gravitate towards this because this is sort of a lifeline for them. This has always been a problem for the evolutionist community. How is it bit by bit when we need all these various things to come together all at the same time simultaneously? So they're using this as a lifeline. They're all gravitating towards this. And they've won over many researchers, but some pieces of the puzzle, Carl, are still missing. Here we go, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps the most persuasive argument is that the simpler ideas don't work. As is the case with many things in life, she concludes, the beginning was probably more complicated than we had thought.
Yeah,
so
probably.
Basically, she's admitting we don't know anything, is what she's saying. And that's what Ken Ham was saying throughout the debate. You guys don't know anything. You don't know anything. You are simply making judgments based on your own personal proclivities and ideologies. And you know what? He was saying, we basically do the same thing. We do the same thing.
Yeah.
But God did it is just as viable a conclusion as, microbes turned into biologists over billions of years. And,
That's right.
And fish also turned into human beings.
That's right.
We all have the same evidence. Let's just at least admit that.
Yes, and listen, everybody on the planet admits it's got to be one of those two things. It can't be anything else. They say, well, aliens put us here. Well, where did they come from? It either had to be spontaneous or evolution. Evolution now doesn't make sense, even to the evolutionists. They're admitting it doesn't make sense. So it's got to be that God did it. That's it. All right, Mike, thank you for another electric session, man. I love you. We got to get out of here. Folks, that's Mike Shoesmith. You can get him at ppsimmons@live.com, ppsimmons@live.com. We'll be back in 4 minutes.
Welcome to an encore broadcast of Freedom